I want to thank my good friend, Assistant Minority Leader from South Dakota, for a very, very good review of exactly where we are, and I agree wholeheartedly, except for a little bit of the IRA. We might have a little difference of opinion there because I think it really is an energy security bill, and we're all going to work with and together to make sure an all the above energy approach is what we're going to take. But with that, I want to thank him. I think it was very good, and as one Democrat, I agree wholeheartedly. I'd like to work with you on that. I ask unanimous consent that I, Senator Cornyn, and Senator Bennett be permitted to complete our remarks prior to the scheduled votes.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today to thank my friend from Oklahoma, Senator James Lankford, for continuing the Senate's long tradition of delivering President George Washington's farewell address earlier this week. It's an annual reminder of what is great about America, but it is eerie how his warnings ring true today, even though it was delivered some 227 years ago. President Washington warned of the dangers of putting the will of political party ahead of the will of the nation. He also warned against the accumulation of debt and encouraged us to cherish public credit as a very important source of strength and security. My personal relationship with this and understanding is my grandfather, affectionately known as Papa Joe. He would always say, Joe, if you have unmanaged debt, you will make cowardly decisions of how you live your life. And yet, here we are today, watching party politics and out-of-control spending threaten the very foundation of our great nation. This is exactly what George Washington was talking about, and he was so right 227 years ago. And what's so wrong with Washington today, and what the American people are really sick and tired of that's going on. The American people have had enough of the accounting gimmicks and budgetary games that we play in Congress, and it has got to stop. I would venture to say that there are very few accountants, professionals in this field, and accounting professionals that have expertise that could make any sense out of our scoring and how we expense. The scoring and expensing of what we think it'll cost and what actually does, and how they transfer those back and forth. It's almost unbelievable. The American people deserve the truth, and every Republican and every Democrat, we have the responsibility to tell them the truth. So let's start with the facts. Fact one, 2013, federal spending was less than $3.5 trillion. Today, it's more than $6.2 trillion in 10 short years, less than 10. That's an 80% increase. We've increased our expenses voluntarily $2.8 trillion in a very short time. It's hard to believe, it truly is. Fact number two, last year's total revenues were $4.9 trillion, 4.9, which left us with a deficit of $1.4 trillion. No matter what anyone says, this is from CBO. This is our scoring people. Fact number three, we've been spending more than we bring in. Think about this, all of us. Think about it. We've been spending more than we bring in our government every year for the past 21 years. Every year. And the debt that has resulted from is absolutely crippling. Think about 21 years. How many people could do that? How many citizens? How many of your constituents, my constituents, West Virginia, New Mexico, Texas, wherever they may live? How many could basically run a deficit that long and still have a home, have a family, be functioning any way, shape, or form? Most of us couldn't even make it 21 days. Okay, you've got to balance things out and make adjustments. I've never seen anything like it, and we basically, I guess if you have a printing press, you don't have to worry. Well, fact number four, the years of fiscal irresponsibility have brought us to the crisis that we face today. Our debt, as we stand here and speak to you before today, is $31.46 trillion. That's our public debt, which equals over $94,000 per every man, woman, and child in West Virginia, and in the United States, and in New Mexico, and in Texas, and in everywhere else. $94,000 per person in our great country. This year we're going to spend more than $600 billion just on debt, just on basically servicing the debt of the nation. That's like getting a credit card and you owe $5,000 on your credit card, but you have to pay $340 just the interest that month. And all you can do is pay the interest. You can't even touch the principal because you're barely able to pay the interest. But think about this. Just the interest on our debt is more than $5,000 per household in America. $5,000 if everyone fulfilled their obligation, I guess. How can anyone with really a straight face deny that we have a problem? How can any of us, no matter what part of the political spectrum we come from? It doesn't have to be this way, and the American people deserve better than this. Our problem really isn't a Republican problem or a Democratic problem. It's an American problem. It truly is. Every American. We have a problem. And only as we start putting our country first and acting as Americans can we fix it. It can't be this total political division. It's not my fault, it's your fault. It's their fault. And vice versa, depending on where you're standing, I guess, in the body here and what political identity you have to you. President Trump added, and the people want to say, whose fault is it? It's all of our fault. Under President Trump, we added an estimated $7.5 trillion to projected debt levels from legislation and executive orders, including $4 trillion that was not directly because of COVID. $7.5 trillion in those 4 years. Under President Biden, we've added more than $5 trillion to projected debt levels from legislation and executive orders, and including more than $2.5 trillion not related to COVID. So whoever you want to blame, we're all at fault. My Democratic friends don't want to say a word about our out-of-control spending and are outright refusing to even talk to Republicans about reasonable and responsible reforms. All we hear is about we have to have a clean debt ceiling. A clean debt. We're going to pay our debts. We have to pay our sins of the past. But can't we at least sit down and discuss? Just discuss, how do we get here so fast? Faster than any time in history. In a 10-year period, how do we accumulate this much debt? Can't we even talk about that and see if there's a pathway forward? My Republican friends refuse to offer any specifics, and some have recklessly threatened default, which is absolutely not on the table, cannot be on the table, and will not happen, I can assure you. We'll never solve the problem by each party running in the opposite directions, and we'll only be able to change course by coming together, embracing common sense, and finding common ground. Just think of our own lives. When we go home, leave these bodies, when we go home in Congress, 535 of us, go back to our home place. Go back and sit down at our kitchen table. Work with our families and look at where we are financially. Just think about it. It doesn't really have to be this way. They really expect better, and they should be getting better, every person in America. So, really, what should we do? First and foremost, the President and Congress need to do our jobs right now. No exceptions, no excuses. Now, let me tell you, what I'm going to be telling you now is something we've not practiced since I've been here for 12 years. We need to pass a budget on time. Pass a budget on time. That's by September 30th. The President's already over a month behind schedule when he submits his budget next week. It was due on February the 6th. Now, the dates I'm going to give you, that comes out of the Balanced Budget and Emergency Deficit Control Act of 1985. We have a piece of legislation that tells us the guidelines and the timetables that we should do that to run this great country of ours. By April 1st, the Senate Budget Committee needs to report their budget resolution. By April 15th, the House and Senate need to reconcile the differences they may have in their budgets. And then by September 30th, we must approve all spending bills. And just simply saying, we shouldn't go home until we get it done. We really shouldn't. If we don't pass a budget, we as elected leaders, from the President all the way down, we shouldn't get paid. Period. Think about this. The American workers, they don't get paid if they don't get their job done. They just don't get paid if they don't work. And neither should any of us. I don't know how ever to make us follow the guidelines. We have a piece of legislation we haven't followed since 1985. So the only thing I know is maybe the money would stop us from not doing our job and start doing our job. That's why earlier this year I was proud to reintroduce the No Budget, No Pay Act with my friend from Indiana, Mike Braun, to hold members of Congress accountable, and we should do our job or not get paid. I've introduced this common sense. Tom Coburn, my dear friend, and God rest his soul, from Oklahoma, we started this in 2011 when I got here. Tom said, I think it's something you like, Joe. So I jumped on it with Tom and been on it ever since. The continuing weaponization of the debt and deficit and the political games that we all play need to stop. They need to stop. While this may seem like common sense to most Americans, it'll be a huge accomplishment for Congress if we just operated in a timely fashion. The savings would be great, and no one has to bear any cuts. Just get it done on time. Talk to the military. Talk to anybody. How devastating CRs are, continuing resolutions, omnibus bills at the end, all the things that happen. It's been 20 years since we passed a budget on time. We haven't had a real budget at all, even a late one, since 2016. A late one, 2016, but we haven't had a real budget since 20 years. I don't know how everybody else does, but I can tell you, if you're out of sync that bad, you better sit down and work something out. Last year, neither the House nor the Senate Budget Committee even bothered to pass a budget out of the committee. Even bothered to do one. It's unbelievable. And if you're listening at home and this sounds absolutely pathetic and crazy, that's because it is. No one's holding our feet to the fire. We're not holding our own feet to the fire. It's unacceptable that we run the single largest economic entity in the universe without a budget in place. Let me tell you, any household and any business that does not recognize what their income and outgo is, they're not going to be in business long. You're not going to be profitable. You'll probably be bankrupt as an individual. 21 years of running deficits, can't do it as an individual, or a business can't do it. Nobody in this type of an economy and this type of structure of a government can operate and survive. As governor, I used to hold weekly, and governors are responsible because I think there's 46 or 48 states that have a balanced budget amendment. That means we, as a chief executive officer in our states, are responsible for balancing the budget. We sit down every week, like clockwork. My financial people would come to my office every Tuesday afternoon. It was baked in every day, every Tuesday. And we'd sit down and go over any adjustments that might need to be made. And we would make them. When the financial crisis hit in 2008 and 2009, we were doing it sometimes twice a day to stay ahead of the curve by not falling into the trap and having a deficit. We had to make tough cuts, but we lived with it. West Virginians came through it, and we were better financially than ever before because we stayed ahead of the curve. Now, as a United States Senator, I'm embarrassed to say that not only are we not living within our means, we don't even want to discuss it and talk about it, what the problems may be. We need to stop digging our heels in and work out our differences when it comes to dealing and with controlling our spending and lifting the debt ceiling. At least we can talk about it. At least we can agree that we have a problem. At least we can basically maybe come together and find out how did we get to where we got to so quickly. We need to put all of our ideas on the table, and then just like we did last year with a number of important bipartisan bills, so that we can pass and we can agree on bipartisan legislation and create long-lasting fiscal accountability. Senator Chuck Schumer, Senator Mitch McConnell, Senator Congressperson Kevin McCarthy, Congressperson Hakeem Jeffries, they need to propose a budget, allow for debate and discussion, and put it up for a vote. This needs to happen. The debt ceiling clock is ticking. Can't afford to wait any longer. We need to serve as true fiduciaries for our country. That's what we're here to do. Projections are that in a few short years, the national debt as a share of the economy will be the highest it has ever been in the history of this country. The debt will exceed the prior record of 106% of GDP, which we set after World War II. Think about when we were the highest debt ever until now, the highest debt, and what happened to cause that debt. The United States of America entered the war on all fronts. We saved the world from fascism. We basically helped rebuild Europe. We had something to show for that. What do we have to show for it now? What do we truly have to show for the debt that we've incurred right now? Most everyone uses 2050 as a benchmark. I hear 2050 in so many scenarios for accomplishments in different arenas. So you pick whatever you've heard to 2050 that you may fit in. But 2050 has been the high water mark. But I want to tell you what happens. If we continue down the path that we're on, we will have accumulated by 2050 nearly $130 trillion of public debt. We're at 31.46 right now, $130 trillion. Just to service the interest on the debt, just to service the interest on the debt will be $5 trillion a year. This is by CBO. This is not me or anybody else coming up and trying to scare the bejesus. This is what these young Americans are going to be facing with their children and grandchildren by 2050. Not only that someone can tell me that this could even be plausible, but think about everyone here. Think about everyone in this great body. Think about your family. Think about your constituents. Our national debt weakens our economy, it weakens our national security, it weakens the trust Americans have in their government, and it weakens our role in the world. It weakens our role in the world. And I'll tell you, my grandfather, again, Papa said, unmanaged debt, which we have a runaway train right now, unmanaged debt will make cowardly decisions. You will make cowardly decisions. Fortunately, we still have time this year to prevent a catastrophic financial forecast. I'm asking all of you to join me in calling for, first, an honest budget without accounting gimmicks and tricks. Second, a short-term deal to bring down our out-of-control spending right now this year. And a plan to deal with our longer-term fiscal challenges. The common sense approach offers the accountability Americans want, the responsibility approach that we need, and the results we deserve. My constituents have begun to ask me, how serious a crisis could we face if we continue to ignore our nation's debt? I think I've laid out the seriousness of our financial situation if we continue down the path that we are on. From President Washington, our founding father, 227 years ago, to a more modern-day warning from our then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in 2011, Admiral Mike Mullen, my first Armed Services meeting. He was testifying before the Senate Armed Services. He was asked the question, what's the greatest threat our nation faces? We thought it was going to be China, Russia, whatever it may be. Without skipping a beat, without missing a word, he said, the debt of our nation is the greatest threat that we face. The debt of our nation. Just like the warning of our founding fathers in his farewell address, those words are even truer today than they were then. If you love your children, if you love this country, you'll stop the madness and start acting reasonably and responsibly to get our government's financial house in order. It's long past due. The partisan politics can wait. There's always times to have arguments and disagreements. But the looming debt crisis cannot. It cannot basically have the disruption that we have and the discourse and the political toxic atmosphere that we have here. We've got to come together for the sake of our great country. So as I close, I want to say, may God bless, which he has blessed this great country, and by all means, help the United States of America to be even better than what we are today. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.